On the 26th of July this year, the South African Department of Trade and Industry announced the country's intent on refraining from entering into any future bilateral investment treaties. The bilateral treaties play an important role in investors' decisions to invest in markets and therefore will greatly impact the country.
South Africa has many BITs with the aim of providing protection to foreign investors. After the apartheid era, the South African government embarked on ways of creating an investor-friendly environment and therefore concluded a number of BITs, more notably with the European Union. The decision to not renew existing BITs will result in the gradual phasing out of the European countries, who contribute to over 80% of total FDI into the country. There have also been rumblings that such an approach by the South African government could pave the way for further talks and perhaps the implementation of nationalisation of resources, and may therefore scare off potential investors.
I'm asked in Europe, should we still invest in South Africa? And of course I say, yes, by all means do it. But then people point at several issues. They point at the nationalization debate. They point at Marikana. They point at the BITs. And we are brought in a defensive position. And I don't want that the South African government and myself are in a defensive position. I want that we are able to show, no, look, everything is in place, come.
But this has not entirely deterred investors from South Africa. German companies and investors, for example, are still looking to further deepen and strengthen ties with the country.
German economy, especially our small and medium-sized enterprises, have a long-term interest in South Africa. So I think a rating by rating agencies, Moody's and so on, are not so important. I think more important is the question of skilled people, the question of security, and very good system for investments. And so I think South Africa is a very good market for automotive industry, maybe for raw materials, and that is a new market for renewable energy. And that is the reason why our companies will come to South Africa now and in the future.
Despite the challenges that South Africa faces, growth prospects for the country are still positive, given the investments made in recent years. And with large infrastructure projects currently underway, South Africa is gearing to accelerate its economic growth. Tumisho Maganyele, South Africa, Johannesburg.
Still with me in studio, Davi Root, Chief Economist at the Efficient Group, and Greg Knott, Director and Head of Africa Practice at Worksman's Attorneys as well. Davi, we've got the Department of Trade and Industry trying to incentivize business even more so and investment with mechanisms like the bilateral investment treaties. How do you rate effectiveness of a mechanism like that?
I think the approach is wrong. I think the approach should not be what can we do to get more integration with the South African economy with the rest of Africa. I think the first step should be and must be just to remove the obstacles in the way of integration. And there are many examples of obstacles if you want to do business in Africa. A simple example, if you want to go through the border post, you have to have a passport. Why can't we get a SADC passport, for instance? Why do you have to go through a border post if you want to transport something? Why is it not easier? Why can't we just drive the lorry through the border post? Those sort of things should be done. And of course, many other things, like for example, in the case of South Africa, it's not easy to start a business in South Africa. South Africa is a sophisticated economy, and it's quite often, from an administrative point, easier to start a business in, say, Botswana, for example, than in South Africa. But of course, South Africa is more sophisticated in a way. I guess we have to have a little bit more paperwork, but make it easier. And those are the sort of things. So the emphasis must be not on what can be done, but what can we do to remove the obstacles?
So that's some of the red tape that businesses have to deal with. What about the cost of doing business? I mean, it is high and it impacts return on investment at the end of the day. I mean, we've had businesses having to deal with escalating costs on the labor front, infrastructure costs as well. When do you see us getting to a point where infrastructure is supportive of South Africa being fully open for business?
Yes. Alicia, if I may, just to pick up on Davi's point in terms of taking away the barriers in Africa. A couple of years back in Tanzania at the World Economic Forum, Africa Economic Forum, there was a round table of presidential leaders, funny enough. And why I say that was put to the highest level. And the biggest discussion at that particular seminar and meeting was the removal of visas. In other words, make access from east to west, north to south, acceptable and easy. And it was a discussion about visas, nothing more complex than get those visas gone so you can actually have the trade between nations. So that is one of the big issues.
Yeah.
Coming back to cost, yeah, of course, cost is a hugely important aspect, and of course, right now at the moment with wages, energy costs, that's precisely what investors look at, and also access to local and to foreign company finances in South Africa. So it's energy costs, wages, and looking at the costs of finance. Those are big issues. Coupled to that, of course, is also the speed of doing business. That's the big issue, because the longer it takes, the more costly it will be. So the more effective, the more efficient that we are in working between our institutions, in the company's registrar's office, or the master's office, or whatever the case may be, investors want simplicity and efficiency.
So what investors want is support
Correct.
by government, and by all the levels of government, the local authorities, provincial, central government. And the reality is, just have a look at the Auditor General's report. Those guys are not good, really.
Yeah.
They are, in fact, I think that's the single biggest threat to the South African economy. It's a state that is collapsing in its own weight, in its own incompetence. It takes too long to get just about everything. But I must say, there has been some improvement recently, but we can do so much better. Something that I think that I would have done as a first priority, if you look at the South African, the local economic issues in South Africa, I would certainly look at our tax regime. It is far too complicated, it's far too difficult, it's far too expensive to run.
Expensive,
We
Davi. I
have to
mean, we've had
simplify.
some say possibly the high levels of taxation experienced on the African continent, with African companies taxed the highest, is one of the biggest impediments. I mean, it's, it's come to business as a very big constraint. Should we be using our fiscal policies more effectively to draw in investment?
Yes, but again, not use it, but use it less. And you can do it less, but what I mean by that is, look at your tax system, for example, and simplify that. Don't use tax incentives to get people to invest. Just make your tax system so simple and straightforward that people want to come in any event. If you want to use your fiscus, do it on the expenditure side. If you want to support somebody somewhere, give a subsidy rather than to give us some sort of tax break. Because but the moment you give some sort of tax break or some sort of exception on the tax side, then you complicate things and you create opportunities for corruptions and all that.
And when the day comes where you need to actually reverse things, that's
gotta
when
be a
you
nice
trigger a whole lot
precisely
of
right.
uproar.
That's right.
Greg, let's look at the sectors that we had Yinka highlight at in the first part of the show in terms of the sectors that are drawing investors in. He highlighted real estate specifically, more so on the residential side, but then manufacturing and capabilities there in a very big way too.
Well, manufacturing, funny enough, and Davi can talk to this better than I can, but manufacturing at the moment, as the rand slides, should be happy days for them. But of course, with industrial disputes taking place, that works against it. But with the rand positioned as it is at the moment, that should be happy, as I say, happy days for manufacturing in our country. And that's what we need, because manufacturing provides jobs. Jobs provide security, it mitigates against political risk, and hence investors come into our country. So the rand is working in our favor at the moment, but against us is industrial action.
Absolutely.
I'm afraid the rand's not going to save us, because there's a lot of empirical evidence that the weak rand is actually bad for us. And in any event, even if the rand was that silver bullet, you can't keep on using the currency. The value of that's going to be eroded through inflation in any event. We need to address labor issues in South Africa. And actually what we should have had the past 2 or 3 years is another boom in investment, especially on mining. We haven't seen that, again, because of policy uncertainty.
Well, what about a focus on, sorry to interrupt, but a focus on other industries aside from your mainstream sectors where we know beneficiation has been very much on the radar screen?
Well, something that I think South Africa has got to really, what we can offer a lot to the rest of Africa is in the service industry. I'm referring specifically to financial services. And that is exactly what is happening. All our banks are in Africa, investment managers are in Africa, they are really expanding into Africa. And Africa, many countries in Africa, the financial environment is not really very modern yet. I mean, there's a lot of things that need to be done, and maybe we can send our financial gurus in there to assist some of those countries. We know from my company, we are doing business with other countries in Africa, but sometimes it's just about impossible because they don't have legislation, they don't have a proper support system. We don't even know whether we need to be registered somewhere as an asset management, for example, if you go to Mozambique.
Yeah.
I agree with that, the professional service. But another sector which is quite interesting and often overlooked, which traditionally quite strong in, is agriculture. Now, if you look at Mozambique, for instance, up in the Tet province, we have Motis and so on, and gas finds and oil finds and so on. What is needed is food, and that we can export, and that we are exporting at the moment. In fact, it's quite a success story. And that's something which is one sector which we just don't seem to necessarily hone on and say, and I agree with Davy, there is absolutely no silver bullet. It's all working together. That's what we have to do.
Well, Greg, Davy, unfortunately we've run out of time, so we're going to have to leave the conversation there. But consensus at the desk for now seeming to be that South Africa still does hold competitive advantage when it comes to it being an investment draw card for investors globally. It's interesting because we've had quite a few critical comments doing the rounds this week. One from Business Day's Peter Bruce saying, another week, another downgrade. If this gets any more regular, we'll be able to calculate to the day just how long it took the African National Congress to shut down the economy as an investment prospect. So these are the conversations that are being had, but nice to see that we've still got some optimism that presents itself right now.